Welcome in, I'm Artress, and in this video, let's go over the Enel deck list that I brought to the Los Angeles One Piece Regional, hosted by TCG over the past weekend at the time of this recording. If you're unfamiliar with what Enel does, he's a new leader that came out in OPO5, and he says, on the opponent's turn, once per turn, when your number of life cards becomes 0, add 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards, then trash 1 card from your hand. That effect is extremely strong, especially when you're trying to grind out in a late game scenario against a lot of different leaders. And I thought that this was a good reason, at least a good enough reason to bring this deck to a One Piece regional. Prior to going to the regional though, I ended up taking it to a local, which of course you're gonna say, oh, it's a local, it doesn't really matter, but I think that the locals that I play at are pretty strong. I'm in the SoCal region and I play at a place called Psycho Turtle, which has a lot of strong players. The actual tournament winner for this past weekend plays that there on a regular, and then we have a few other people that top quite often there. But I ended up taking it to that local and going 4-0 with it, playing a multitude of different decks. But I think that's not the real test. The real test, of course, is the regional itself, where I ended up going 7-2 and facing mostly yellow mirrors, Enel mirrors, and then often a lot of Sakazukis as well. So we'll go over the matchups in a second, but overall, I think after 9 rounds, the deck is really strong, and I will continue to play it. I have a lot of fun playing it, and I think that's the most important thing when playing this game. It's often, you forget, like, this is a game, you're supposed to be having fun with it, and I feel like a lot of times I've been grinding some of these decks and haven't had as much fun, but with Enel, I feel like that's a little bit different. So I'm very excited for the rest of this set, but let's go over the deck list. And if you find anything in this video useful or informative, please make sure to drop a like and a sub. It helps out the channel immensely. And as well, join the Discord so we can talk about One Piece outside of the YouTube comments. The link is in the description below. So enough chattering, let's get into the actual deck list itself. So let's start off with the 2Ks. I'm running 2 Canis, and this is just simply a 2K. The effect itself says you may place one of your stages at the bottom of your deck, draw 1 card, and trash 1 card from your hand. I'm not running any stages, so this doesn't really matter. All this is here for is a searchable 2K, because I am running the Sky Island package, and this is a Sky Island card. Then we're running 4 of the Capone Beige, which I think this is probably the strongest 2K in the game. Of course, this trigger says up to one of your opponent's leader or character cards cannot attack during this turn. There are a bunch of times where I ended up protecting myself during different rounds to be able to either starve off lethal attacks or prevent an attack that might have been like too damaging, like a double attack or a banish. And so this in life is extremely strong. Of course, it's not searchable, but because it is a 2K counter and is also a strong trigger, you want to include 4 of them in your deck no matter what. Then to round out the 2Ks, I am running 4 Satori, which this is a new card from OPO5, and it is a mostly just a 2K, but it is a trigger effect, which says you may trash 1 card to play this card. And so this is a strong 5K body. It can come up often enough where maybe you're needing an extra body on the field. That extra pressure is worth tossing a card out of your hand for. Oftentimes, though, I will just take this to hand and then just stack up a bunch of 2Ks. Because this deck does a great job of stacking up cards in your hand. Now, to talk a little bit about the curve of the deck, besides the 2Ks, of course, let's go into the actual curve of how we're playing this. So I'm running 2 Shura, and the Shura is your Sky Island Searcher. I'm only running 2 because I didn't want to run 4. I feel like 4 is too much for this deck. Obviously, I'm running, as we get through this, you'll see I'm running quite a lot of Sky Island cards. However, your top end, which is your 8-drop Katakuri and your 9-drop Yamato, are not searchable. They're not Sky Island. And so it feels really bad to play this card and then pass up all of those top end cards along the way. What this is used for is oftentimes early game, if you can open with this and play it down, you can fill out your curve by finding Ohms or your Holies or your Gadatsus. You can also find your Rush Enel, and then also on top of that, you can find some of the 2K counters that I just showed off. The other thing that was really useful with this card is using the Shura to find your 200 million volts, which is a game closer, which you would likely want to hold at least 1 in hand while you're playing. If you can't, then you can just search it with the Shura. And also a really strong play that I think has been talked about quite often is on your 10 Dawn turn, you can play a Shura down, use the search, and then 8-drop Katakuri, put it back in life. So this is a strong card, of course. I'm only running it at 2 because, like I said, I don't want to pass up too much of my top end when searching for other things that might not be as important. I am running 1 Brûlé, which might be a little bit crazy, but I like the artwork of this, and I didn't have an extra alternate art of this, so I didn't want to run the basic art, which is, I know, a silly reason, but running one Brûlée does come out of life every so often. I think it came out of life maybe twice in the entire tournament. Other than that, it is a 1K counter, or you can just use it, hard cast it as a blocker, which sometimes it comes up, especially if you're playing like the 7-cost Enel, and then you play this down to protect something. So yeah, strong card overall, but I think the Sanji blocker, you might have an argument for running that a little bit more over the Brûlée. We'll get to that in a second though. Then I think what is a really strong package overall is the 4 Ohm followed by 4 Holy, which these cards go in tandem with each other. Basically, Ohm says there's 2 effects on it. If you have 2 or less life cards, this character gains plus 1,000 power. So it's a 4-drop 6K body essentially, because you're more than likely going to be at 2 or less life. And then on play, look at the top 5 cards from your deck, reveal up to 1 Holy, and then add it to your hand. Then place the rest at the bottom of your order, bottom of your deck in any order, and play up to 1 Holy from your hand. So you play this down, you look at the top 5. If you find a Holy, you can grab it and then play it. If you don't have it in hand, or if you didn't find it off of the top 5 search and you have one in hand, you can play it from your hand. So it basically just gives you extra value by getting 2 bodies that are harder for your opponent to remove. So I think this is a really strong reason to run the Sky Island package, the Ohm Holy combo, especially if you're going second on your turn 2 play. You can play this down and then have 2 bodies for the price of 1, which is really strong. And of course, Holly or Holy, however you want to say it. Of course, I thought it was Holy, but it's spelled Holly on the card. But is just a general 3-drop 5K body vanilla. So hard to beat that, especially early game. And then getting these out is really strong. I am running 2 Sanji blockers, which might be a little bit of a psycho move. This is a strong card because it comes out of life with a trigger. You can discard 1 card to play it on the field. It's very similar to the Brûlée in the sense that it is a blocker that comes out of life. The Brûlée, you don't have to pay with discarding a card. This one you do, which is one of the reasons why I was hesitant to run more than 2. I wanted to run actually 3, like a 3 Sanji and then 1 Brûlée split, but I couldn't find the room, and I didn't really find the blockers as useful. Although I will admit, I will try to find room for them going forward, but I think the 2 did fine just for me. Running 4 Shirahoshis, which this card is a great trigger to come out of life. It's on play, Graceful Charity. Draw 3 cards, trash 2 from your hand. It's great for filtering. It's great for finding your top end. And also, one of the things that I did in one of my matches is I had it come out of life. I Katakuri'd it, put it back into life. It came down when somebody hit me, then I drew another Katakuri, and the next turn I put it back in life. And I just kept drawing cards, filtering out my hand, and my hand just by the end of the game was like 11 or 12 cards strong. So I felt like Whitebeard at that point. But most of the time, you're gonna want to see this in life, obviously. You can hard cast it, which I've done a couple of times. I did throughout the tournament. And it does throw your opponent off because your opponent's gonna be like, well, this person doesn't have anything in their hand. But that's actually opposite. I usually had some good stuff in hand, and I just wanted to see what more I could get for later turns. But yeah, this card is extremely strong. I love running it at 4 because if I run it at 4, there's a good chance I'm going to see it pop out of life. Next, we're running 4 Gadatsu, which is a new card that was introduced in OPO5. This is an on-play KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost equal to or less than the number of your opponent's life cards. So a good reason to kind of run a Starve Enel strategy for a first couple of turns. Just don't swing at your opponent so that their life total stays around 4 or 5. And then you play a Gadatsu to KO something that they just threw down, and then you can start swinging after that to get good value out of it. This is a good, strong card overall. There are some matchups, though, that it doesn't feel great in. It doesn't do much work in like Red Purple Luffy or Purple Luffy, simply because their life totals will be going down further than the cost of a lot of their cards. But in other matchups, like Zoro or Bello Betty, that card puts in a lot of work. I'm running 2 7-cost Rush Enel. This is a very strong card, which is a reason to run the Sky Island package because you can search this out and then throw down a Rush body. Your opponent might not be expecting a Rush body either, especially on 7 Dawn. They might be expecting like a Big Mom or maybe some other smaller characters to come out, but this card is giving yellow a good reason to play aggro just because it is a rush card. But the other thing that is really strong with this card is once per turn, if this character would leave the field, you may trash one card from the top of your life cards instead. And if there is a Monkey D. Luffy on the like a Monkey D. Luffy character, not leader, on the field, this effect is negated. And oftentimes there's not going to be a Monkey D. Luffy card on the field. So this effect is usually live most of the time, and you can get your opponent to try to waste their resources or their time, especially against Sakazuki. They'll have to use a bunch of resources to try to get this off the field. The first time, like maybe they Hound Blaze it, you use the effect, and then they have to Hound Blaze it again or do something else, then it's gone. But they have to discard a bunch of cards to get rid of it. So it's a very strong card in certain matchups. So I like it at 2, maybe you want to run it up a little bit more. Running 2 of the 7-cost Big Mom. This is an on play. Your opponent chooses 1, trash 1 card from the top of your opponent's life cards, or add 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards. This is I don't know if this card is a trap or not. I think it's a good card overall, and I definitely will be running more in the next set when the next set becomes a little bit more control-oriented. However, I feel like this deck kind of wants to play a little bit more aggro in OP05, and so the 7-cost Big Mom is, at times, a weird card to play. It's good in the mirror matchup because your opponent likely will just heal life for you. There's moments in like the purple Luffy matchup where you can throw this down and they will give you a life because they don't want one. But there's other times where it kind of just feels awkward to play it down, especially if your opponent is in a high life total and it doesn't really matter to them to trash a card. Or maybe you throw it down, or you have it in your hand and it's the only top end you have and your opponent's, it doesn't really do anything at that. So I might want to consider running this a little bit less, maybe 1. But then again, there's times where I do play it and I feel like, oh wow, this card put in work. So I'm on the fence about that card, to be honest. I was running 4 of the A-drop Katakuris. I feel like I'm holding a gold mine right now based off of the prices of these that have recently spiked. But this is an on-play add up to 1 character with a cost of 8 or less, the top or bottom of the opponent's life cards face up. So you can use this in a very versatile manner where you can put your own cards back on the top of your life to heal. There's moments where you can take off the threat that your opponent has thrown down. This is a great answer to like the 7-drop Captain Kidd in purple, the 7-drop Sakazuki, no, 7-drop Borsellino rather, in Sakazuki decks. This also answers the 8-drop Kidd if you're going against Rosinante. Otherwise, you might want to just throw this on the field and like I said, put a Shirahoshi back in life or put a Shura back in life. There's also some unique play that you can do if you are in a very desperate pinch. You can play this down and then put itself back in life to heal yourself. I've done that against a couple of decks before and ended up just like grinding my opponent out by doing that, which is a very strange way to play, but that is a way to play this card. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you're in a desperate matter, maybe you should. And then to round out the top end, we are playing 4 9-cost Yamato. This is on play, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost equal to or less than the total of you and your opponent's life cards. Then if you have 1 or less life cards, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards. Enel, being a leader that stays around 1 life the entire game, profits off of this card probably the most out of any other yellow leader, simply because you go down to 1 life and then you play this and now your opponent has to swing through, I think, 4 attacks in order to present lethal for you. So, and also you're establishing a body, and this body also can KO something on the field. So overall, you're getting 3 really strong effects for 9 Dawn. If you're running less than 4, you really should not. This is the meat and potatoes of the deck, the whole reason to run this deck, in my opinion. I was running 2 El Thor, which I'm gonna be honest, this is, overall it's a strong card. Yeah, it's a reverse Rad Beam, but there were a lot of times in the tournament where I just felt like this was dead in hand, or I had an early game where it doesn't really do anything. Of course, if it comes out of life, it's a pseudo, like Gadatsu Bolt kind of thing. The effect is KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost equal to or less than the number of your opponent's life cards. I think this is a very cuttable card, and we'll get over to some of the changes that I'll get to in a second, but overall, this was underwhelming for me in the tournament. I think I used it maybe once at its full potential. I'm running 2 200 million volts Amaru, which I think this card is one that you should consider bumping up. I didn't find a lot of room to make room for 3 or 4, but The two that I had, I definitely found it when I needed it. It was often a card where I found it maybe early in the game and I could have used the effect off of life, but I thought, well, if I just hold on to this, this can help me win. And the effect is main up to one of your leader or character cards gains plus 3,000 power during this turn. Then if you have one or less life cards, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. This takes care of a lot of blockers like maybe Rebecca or your Borsalinos or the 4-cost Law. And if you're going in the mirror matchup or maybe in a Katakuri matchup, you'll have a Sanji pop out of life randomly or a Brule pop out of life randomly, especially if you're going for lethal. Just hold on to this and you can rest it and then swing even harder. This card won me so many games, so I am very fond of it. I will probably consider running it up to maybe 3, although I will say it does feel maybe a little excessive to run it at 3. The trigger is you may trash 2 cards from your hand, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards. So this is also a really strong effect, especially if somebody's trying to present lethal to you and you're down at 1 life, this is your last life, you heal up to 2 because this procs first and then your leader effect can proc after that because it recognizes you're at 0. So you go up to 2 life, which is a very strong effect, but once again, you might want to just use this if you can for the actual main effect. And then I'm running 3 Thunderbolts. This card, what can I say? It is a card that sometimes it's a weird card to have in your hand, but if it comes out of life, you love seeing it. It is a main, you may trash 1 card from the top of your life cards, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less, and the trigger is KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less without having to life cards. So this is a very strong effect to come out of life. Definitely had saved me a few times. A lot of the triggers will save you at random times, which feels fun. I know it probably is frustrating to play against yellow for that reason. I think Enel overall though doesn't rely on the casino effect maybe as much as Katakuri. I feel like you can probably play Enel a little bit more skillfully. I'm not saying that Katakuri is an unskillful deck by any means, but I feel like Enel doesn't really rely on the triggers as much. I think when they happen, it feels good, but you typically will rely on kind of starving your opponent a little bit, playing to the board, playing some big bodies, and then just like continuously healing over time. So that is the deck list itself. The changes I would make is I would probably add in, find room for like 1 more Rush Enel. I think this card did really good work, or really strong work rather, in my tournament, especially with all the Sakazukis playing. I think this card does a lot of work against Sakazuki, being able to just apply pressure. A 7k body is not easy for them to counter out of, and on top of that, they have a real difficult time removing this. Because of that, I might want to include an extra copy, maybe remove a 7-cost Big Mom. And then the other couple of cards that I was considering going into this tournament, and then I saw Justin, who won the tournament, was running them as well, which is very strong addition, are the 2 Charlotte Crackers, which I would probably replace the Elthors with. These are good simply because they have a 1k counter, but if they come out of life, it is a strong effect to be able to have Dawn times 1. If you have less life cards than your opponent, you often will. This card gains double attack and plus 1,000 power. So this adds on to the aggression. It's very scary for your opponent to hit you and then see this come out of life, and then the next turn they're taking 2. Especially against like Purple Luffy, they don't want to be seeing this. So this is a very strong card for that reason. You definitely want to see this come out of life against Purple Luffy, because if you play it straight up, they could just poly it the next turn. But that's a risk you might be willing to take. But overall, that's what I would do if I were to change the deck. Add these in and then take out 1 big cost, 1 7-cost Big Mom, and then 2 of the Elthors. My matchups overall, I would say I kind of got lucky at this tournament. I didn't have to go against any Purple Luffys, thankfully. That's one of our harder matchups as Enel. But I did go against 3 mirror matchups. I went against 3 Sakazukis, 1 Red-Green Law, 1 Rebecca, and then 1 Katakuri. So I would say the Enel mirror, I actually ended up winning all my Enel mirrors, and they were all very close. The way that I approach that matchup is I just swing with my leader every turn, get them down to 1 life, but I'm also establishing a board at the same time, but I'm not swinging with the board at all. There's no reason to lead that aggression, in my opinion, to get them down to 1 life lower, because they'll just attack your character instead of attacking you. So I don't mind going down to 1 life, but I also want to get them down to 1 life and then kind of play that game where it's like, okay, how many Yamatos can I chain? How many 8-cost Katakuris can I throw down? So overall, that's how I approached that matchup. It seemed to go over well. There was definitely some close games overall, but we got the dubs overall, I guess. And then I was running against 3 Sakazuki. One of those Sakazukis, so going into this tournament, I was playing Enel, and I thought that was a very good strategy against Sakazuki. My only concern was if they are running the 10-drop Kaido, then that is a problem, because then all of your starving was for nothing. And the first opponent that I went against that was a Sakazuki player was running the 10-cost Kaido. And it turns out that a lot of people are running that. So it was an incorrect meta read by me, but I ended up shifting the tournament during the tournament to be able to kind of adjust to how I played against Sakazuki. So instead of starving them the entire time and then waiting for their hand to be very small, after a certain amount of turns, like I would then start attacking. So I'd wait for maybe like Gadatsu to be active and then play Gadatsu. And if they didn't give me a chance to do anything with Gadatsu, then I would probably just start playing a little bit of aggro at that point, have them answer my board. And it worked out for the other 2 Sakazuki matches that I went against. My first one, of course, was the loss. And then the next 2, I ended up adjusting my game plan, playing that way, and it ended up working for me. So we'll continue to probably try that strategy, and I think that I was being carried on the backbone of the 7-cost Enel for those matchups. The red-green Law was the other matchup that I lost, and I think that's a hard matchup overall. Now, I know Enel does well against aggro decks, but I think red-green Law provides enough pressure and multiple swings, and they have a lot of resources for them to do so, and so that's, I think, a very hard matchup for Enel. You have to play it pretty well, and it's, I think, overall grindy. I definitely had my brain off during that one. For a good example, I think I lost the game around turn 2 or 3 where I bolted a Sanji, and there was no reason for me to do that. I just didn't want them to draw a card, but me going down 1 life could have been an extra life that helped keep me alive further, because I definitely grinded them down to 0 life, and I had a lot of lethal presented. If I just survived like maybe 1 or 2 more turns, probably would have been okay. But yeah, I definitely played too aggressively, too stupidly. So that's probably the reason for my loss there. And then I went against a Katakuri, which the Katakuri matchup is one that if they start chaining enough big moms, then it could be a problem. But I just rushed them down and kind of played aggressively enough that they didn't have a chance to play more than 1 big mom. In fact, I don't even think they played 1 big mom. I got them down to low enough life total where by like the 9 or 10 dawn turn, they didn't feel comfortable dropping that. And then finally, the Rebecca matchup was one where I have played a lot of Rebecca, and so I know how that matchup goes. Overall, I just played very aggressive, swung big early, and then started throwing down units like the 7-cost Russianelle that were very hard for the opponent to remove, and swinging 7 every turn is not something Rebecca wants to see. So overall, that was my tournament. I am definitely going to continue to grind this deck. I think that it is a very strong deck. And I imagine that there's going to be a lot of meta reads where people will be Luffy, people will be playing probably a lot more Sakazuki and get a lot more practice in, but I think I'm going to stick with this because, like I said at the beginning of the video, it's a very fun deck, and if you're not having fun, then what's the point? Also, want to show off the prize cards really fast that I got from the event. Got the Raizo, the Gold Dawn, of course. I always get these Jinbeis. I don't know why I always get the Jinbei Dons. I've probably participated in more than a handful of events, and every single time I get these Jinbei Dons. So kind of disappointing there. Always want the Chopper if you can. Still is eluding me. Of course, got the Mino Rhinoceros. And then, of course, the finalist set. We got the Otama, Kurobi, the Crocodile, the Mino Rhinoceros finalist, Fandom, Scarlet Chiffon. Does anyone run this? What a random yellow card. And then, of course, the 2 cards that everyone coveting over, the Jozu and Marco. So close to getting the Whitebeard. I was 29th overall, so close enough to where I could have gotten 16 maybe if I played a little bit better, but we'll get them in the next tournament. Anyway, this is my deck profile. Those are the things I would change. I think that if you're looking to play yellow, Enel is a great leader to pick up and start learning. You have about maybe a month, less than that, before Nats are here. Grind, grind, grind away. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.